Hi guys, welcome to the webinar. We are glad you guys are all here to join us today. Glad you could log in, sign in, and come here to get some of your questions answered, hopefully, and also ask us some of the questions that we don't answer in the webinar. So today we'll be going through how to launch your FinTech app. This specific webinar is geared towards registered investment advisors in the US. But as a reminder, we do have lots of different partnership types, so this will just kind of outline one of those. As mentioned, we're going to be walking through how to launch your FinTech app with Broker API. Specifically, this webinar is geared towards registered investment advisors in the US, both those who are already registered, those who are in the process, those who are considering it. But also remember that there are plenty of partnership types that we can establish kind of integrations with. So a lot of what you'll see in this webinar will apply to all of those partnership types. So just a couple of housekeeping items before we dive in. The webinar recording and the slides will be emailed to you at the email address that you signed up for this webinar with. If you have questions at any time, feel free to type them in the chat box. We also will do a couple of breaks and pauses where we will answer questions out loud. In that case, we do ask that you don't unmute yourself and ask the question, but rather raise your hand, and then we'll call on you and try to get through all of the questions today. Remember to get in touch, tweet us at Alpaca HQ. So just a quick introduction. My name is Brittany Magnan. I am Business Operations Manager here at Alpaca. When you guys start your integration, you'll be working closely with me to make sure we get through all of the due diligence, regulatory, legal aspects of the partnership. And I'll be here along with all my teammates to assist you in the integration.
Hi, my name is Raj Patel, and I'll be the technology consultant that works alongside Brittany. And I'll basically help with the integration process and any technical questions that you might have.
Great, so high level things we'll be covering today, what hopefully you will learn from this webinar. We'll talk you through the 3 different stages of the Broker API integration. The first one being signing up and building your app in Sandbox. The second stage being doing some testing in an environment that we refer to as limited live. And then also what it will look like to launch your app in full live, our full production environment. We'll go through some due diligence requirements as well as technical requirements for each of these stages. We'll also briefly touch on Alpaca API support models, which will include either project management services or kind of the self-service model where you push yourself through the integration. So just a quick overview and kind of timeline of what this will look like. Most of our partners will spend anywhere from 1 to 6 months in Sandbox. This is where you'll be building your app and have access to unlimited testing. How long you spend here will really depend on the resources you have for your development team. So once you guys are ready to kind of start testing in a limited environment, fix bugs, prepare for your launch, improve on user experience, things like that, that will be where you will work in our limited live environment. Most of our partners will spend 1 to 3 months here. Then your app will be ready for live, and you can get that launched together. We do offer 2 separate support models while you guys are working through the integration, and this really depends on what will work best for your team. So I'll start with the self-service model, which is pretty much where you feel super comfortable building out the entirety of the app. Your questions are quite limited, and you're not in a rush to launch the app. Therefore, so the self-service model will allow you to have access to us through email support. And we do answer quickly, but the model itself, it's going to be up to you to stay on track with your timelines. It's going to be up to you to do most of the tech build out without much support from us. The other model is the project management model, where you get 1 hour a day of dedicated guidance and support from a project manager, a tech consultant, and a due diligence specialist. So you have 3 people readily available to answer any of your questions at any time. You'll have access to the team in a project management tool where we collaborate to get you into live as quickly and smoothly as possible. There are also regularly scheduled calls to discuss the progress of the integration and answer any of your questions over a video call.
So as Brittany stated, the first interaction you'll have with us is in Sandbox. Anyone can create a Sandbox account. You just go to our website, sign up. This will create a broker dashboard account that you can log into to see the accounts that you create, and you can generate your Sandbox key there. Once you've done that, you can either use the Postman collection that we have or start integrating right away. And then some other things to keep in mind while you're in Sandbox is who's going to be conducting the KYC. If it's something that will handle, you'll need to use the events API to kind of listen in to see what the status of accounts are and provide any extra documents that are required. And if you're handling the KYC process, you'll need to incorporate the CIP API. One last thing to consider is the funding flow and making sure that Alpaca, it's compliant with Alpaca's requirements. Sandbox is great for testing, but it's close to feature parity with our live environment. But there are just certain things that you're not going to be able to test until you're in a live environment, which is why we created limited live. So in limited live, you'll be able to open up to 35 brokerage accounts, and it's for internal users only. We'll do the KYC on our end for those accounts. This is the first time you'll be actually creating real accounts with real money to test your fund flow, whether that be ACH wires. And then this will be the first time you'll be executing real buys and sells in a non-simulated environment. And overall, this is where you can test everything, make sure everything's working as you would expect it to. There are some restrictions in limited live. So as I stated previously, you can only open 35 internal accounts. Each account is going to have a max buying power of $5,000 and then a withdrawal limit of $2,000. You won't be able to short or extend margin. And there might be some other restrictions that apply as well.
Great. So we wanted to briefly touch on some of the steps that you'll go through to get into limited live, so you can kind of see on a high level what that will look like. Step one, you'll be submitting some information to us at Alpaca about your legal entity and about the primary control person at your entity, who's usually the CEO or someone else who makes decisions and signs on behalf of the company. Step two would be to work with our sales team to kind of sign a carrying agreement and discuss all of the different items that would come along with that. Step three would then to begin working on building a compliant onboarding flow for your customers. You will submit this back to Alpaca for feedback. So these requirements are not quite listed in their entirety in broker documentation. So therefore, you can reach out to us and sales will send those over to you as well. So step four will be to create a pre-funded account on your app for the email devsuccess-test@alpaca.markets. And some of Alpaca's tech consultants, such as Raj, will go in, test your account and check out, make sure everything looks okay and is functioning well. So step five will require you to make any required changes to your customer onboarding flow and address any technical issues with the functionality of the app. Once you get into live, which is the environment after limited live, you'll have no restrictions. So this environment is the final step and you are considered fully launched once you arrive here. There'll be unlimited account openings, no restrictions on buying power or withdrawal limits. All accounts have access to margin and you will decide when to extend it to which customers and how much. You can coordinate with Alpaca's marketing teams to optimize your launch here as well. So we'll go through in a little bit more detail now the steps to take to go from limited live to live. So step one will be to submit some required due diligence documents. We'll go through in a minute here, kind of high level what those documents look like, but you'll submit all the required documents to Alpaca for review, ideally 1 month before you launch into live. This will give us sufficient amount of time to review them and for you to make any remediations. So if you do not have some of the required documents, we do offer several policy templates that you can use to help you build these out. We also will provide you with some of the assessment sheets that our security team, our risk and compliance and AML teams will kind of use to provide you feedback on your documents. So we are here to support you during this due diligence process. What we ask of you is that you start this as early on as possible to avoid having to kind of load it on our teams at the very end, right before your launch. So just to kind of high level go over some of those documents that are required to be submitted for live, and ideally we'd get them 1 month before your launch. Entity documents such as articles of incorporation, bylaws or an operating agreement, a W-9 tax form is required if you're going to be having custody of any stocks at any time. You will also submit information to us on the ultimate beneficial owners of the company down to 10% and also any authorized users of the backend of Alpaca. So what we'll ask of these individuals would be a photo ID, a completed CIP form that includes some personal data, and as well as a proof of address if you're outside the US. So this whole goal is just to make sure we know who we're doing business with. You also submit over all of your RIA documents. And as mentioned, at this stage, when you're moving into live, you should already be registered with the SEC as an investment advisor. Therefore, you'll send us your Form CRS, advisory service agreement, client agreements, and the works. So then to touch on policies and procedures, as you can see here, there's a list of a couple of different policies and procedures that we would expect to collect. Most important being InfoSec policy. It's a big one. Obviously, we're a tech first company, so we want to make sure we're all being safe, and a few others as well. If you will conduct KYC, which is something Raj touched on earlier. So KYC, you will have to make the decision whether Alpaca will conduct it or you will conduct it. If you want more details about making that decision, we actually hosted a webinar a few weeks ago that dove deep into all of the differences. So at this point, if you do decide that you want to conduct KYC, then you would send us over AML program and different KYC procedures.
So step 2 is doing the tech sign off. So previously, when going from Sandbox to limited live, you would provide a test account to us. But since we're working with real funds here in the limited live, going from limited live to live, we request that you set up a time to do a demo whenever you're ready. Step 3, so obviously throughout this process, there might be some remediations that need to take place, and some are required right away. Others can be done within the first 30 days, and some you have up to 90 days to do them before you launch. In terms of the tech requirements that we'd be checking for to go from limited live to live, we want to check for things like authentication, making sure whoever the user says they are is the actual user, making sure the funding is working properly, the ability to place buys and sells, making sure that the end user is able to see the positions that they have and the transaction history, as well as being able to send the statements and confirms to the end user via email and have it within the app. If you're using the events API for any notifications within the app, making sure those are handled properly. And then lastly, making sure that if Alpaca is conducting KYC, that you are making sure the status is checked and that the proper documents are being sent over. So this is where you want to make sure everything is well put together. In limited live, the designs might be off or there might be some polishing that still needs to be done. But between then and now, you want to make sure that all of that is taken care of. Some things to keep in mind. Once you are in this stage, you'll usually be introduced to a customer relationship manager, and he or she is basically there to assist you and make sure that whatever goals that you have are being met after you've launched and gone live. There's usually a project manager as well and a marketing associate who you can work alongside with. And then there's also a support team that can answer any questions that you might have related to tech topics or operational topics.
Great. So just to kind of do a high level summary here, we talked about the 3 different stages of the broker API integration and outlined some of the differences between each and how you should expect to use each, as well as how long you should expect to spend in each. Those were Sandbox, Limited Live, and Live. We also walked through the basics of the differences between the 2 different Alpaca broker API support models. We walked through the steps for moving into each stage of the integration, including the due diligence requirements and technical requirements for each of those stages. So we do have a couple of questions that just came in. So I'm going to address those first, and then feel free to continue typing. So one of the first questions we got was, to sign the RIA carrying agreement, you must be an SEC registered advisor, correct? So this webinar specifically was geared towards SEC registered investment advisors. But at the same time, as mentioned, we do lots of different partnership types. So we're not restricted to just working with RIAs. So what I do recommend you do, if you are either in the process of becoming an RIA or anything like that, you would likely sign the RIA agreement, but you could also potentially launch as a tech partner. We do have several different kind of partnerships that we will be offering soon. So if you want to have a little bit more information about that, you could send a message to sales@alpaca.markets and they can give you more information. Okay, so we do have another question from Alan. For authentication, is it required to check a client against a credit reporting agency's records like Experian? Does Alpaca handle that when they do KYC? So I'm going to answer this super high level, Alan, but I do recommend that you check out our last webinar on KYC. It'll dive into specifics of the differences between Alpaca conducting it and you conducting it. But usually for conducting KYC, whether it's you or us who handle it, there will be 2 portions. There will be a customer identification portion where we do have to require either documentary or non-documentary identity verification, where we'll check to make sure name, address, date of birth, social security number, tax ID align. And then also we have a watch list screening requirement. So I'll leave that there, but there are the options for either of us to kind of own it.
From a technical perspective, when I said authentication, I was just making sure that like there's a user login and password, and then whatever action they're doing on inside the app, we're able to see on our back end as that same user. So that's just from the tech side.
Raj, I think a question came in from you. Could we use SIP subscription instead of IEX for real-time data in limited live environment?
Yes, you can, but that's you'd have to pay for that. IEX is provided for free, but SIP is not.
Okay, so I see a question coming in from Rob. In order to be an internet-only advisor, the SEC has requested that we be launched. Do you know if limited live typically satisfies this requirement? So if you are already, for you to launch into limited live, from our perspective, you do need to already be registered as an investment advisor. So I haven't had too much experience with specifically this internet-only advisor to be able to give you probably a solid clarification. But as mentioned before, we are obviously super willing to work with you regardless of the stage of that process that you're in. And if you contact sales, they can walk you through kind of exactly how to set this up and the timelines associated with it. So I see somebody asked, they said they missed the KYC webinar. Can you get slides or a recording? Yes, we will be sure to, if someone from one of the other co-hosts wouldn't mind sending a link to where they could find that KYC webinar recording, that would be great, or slides. Okay, so you should see that in the chat box, the next couple of messages. Okay, so when would Robo Advisor likely to go live? We have not announced this yet, and we do not quite have it on the roadmap from my understanding. Raj, do you know if there is a date assigned for that?
Not a set date that I'm aware of.
Okay, so there's another question. How many securities can we trade on Alpaca as of today?
Off the top of my head, I don't know the exact number, but basically, if you hit the assets endpoint, you'll be able to see all the securities that we have available. You have to make sure that the security is both tradable and then it's active. And then if you're trying to, trade on a fractional level, you'd have to make sure that fractional is set to true as well.
Like, can we request some stocks, ADRs, ETFs, not in Alpaca's lists, that we need to implement our portfolio strategy for our clients? We're definitely always open to receiving these and knowing what's being asked for so that we can kind of determine on our end if there's a big enough ask to take it on board. So absolutely, we, Eduardus, we would love to hear a little bit more from you about that. So Daniel, I see that you said you did reach out to sales and haven't heard back. So we'll definitely check up on that and make sure that you are responded to accordingly. As an SEC registered RIA in the US, can I onboard customers from all 195 countries to support it for KYC through Onfido? So just to clarify here, so KYC through Onfido is a documentary verification method that is acceptable for most countries. So there are a few kind of specifics to this that we would have to walk through together. And just to give you guys kind of insight into how that looks, once you are ready to launch with you conducting KYC, we would go through kind of an assessment and we would teach you how to use the CIP API to submit to us all of the data coming in from your provider, such as Onfido. And in this assessment, we would kind of talk about the countries you plan to onboard in, exactly the methods you plan to use. So we do have separate kind of requirements based off of risk level of countries, such as some are prohibited, some are deemed restricted and have additional onboarding requirements, some are deemed high risk, and we ask that you verify full address, which isn't actually able to be done through Onfido. So there are a couple of specifics to this. And Roger, if you are interested in kind of more detail about it, you can tell Sal specifically that you'd like to jump on a KYC CIP API call. I'm usually the person to host those calls, so you can just let them know that you saw this in the webinar and would like to discuss in more detail. Are there any other questions? It does seem like there's an interest in KYC, so we will lead you guys a link to be able to access some of that and make sure to send that out as well. We have a new question coming from Eugene. Will all stocks be available for shorting, and any limitations with that? Raj?
That's another parameter. You can see if it's shortable or not via the assets endpoint. So not all assets will be shortable, but you can figure out which ones from the assets endpoint.
Is there a minimum initial balance limitation for initial transfer or for the cash pool method? So I think this would depend on a couple of different items that you would discuss in your carrying agreement. That's usually where some of the funding kind of restrictions, requirements would be discussed. We would need to know a little bit more detail about how you plan to pool the money to be able to kind of walk you through what that would look like. So this question's a little bit more thorough than probably what we can cover here in this call. But as mentioned, if you reach out to sales, let sales know exactly kind of what you're hoping to discuss, they can either answer your questions or put you in touch with one of us to answer them in more detail once we understand your situation a bit better. All right, Daniel, I think Daniel has a question as well. I see your hand raised. You can feel free to unmute.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to give a comment to give affirmation to our Alpaca team. You guys are really awesome. We have tried the Sandbox for several months and run thousands of trades per day. That's really awesome, and I really appreciate this session. And keep going. Yeah, I'm looking forward to working with you guys. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much. We all definitely put in the blood, sweat, and tears for Alpaca. So that was really lovely of you to take a moment to send that appreciation over. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Great. All right, guys. So we are going to start to kind of wrap up. As mentioned, if you guys do have additional questions, we still do want you to send those over. If you think of anything over the next couple of days or weeks or months or years, feel free to reach out. So I want to give you guys some additional resources here. We have what's called Alpaca Learn. So this has been kind of built off of a lot of frequently asked questions that we get, and a lot of things that you may be curious about, you can likely find here. So our Slack community is also a really great resource. So we do highly recommend that you consider joining the Slack community. You'll hear a lot from our internal team as well as other Alpaca users. And also our source of truth, the broker API docs. So feel free to take a look through these. If you have any additional questions, that's where you would want to reach out to us. So as mentioned a couple times in this call, Sal's going to have the most information to help you guys understand kind of how to get launched and get started, and anything that you would like to kind of ask very specific questions about, or potentially speak with Raj or myself to go a little bit, dive in a little bit deeper in some of these topics. Sales will be able to put you in touch with us. So that's going to be your best email to kind of contact and to move forward. It's been awesome having you guys all on the call today. We really appreciate each and every one of you for taking the time out of your day. I know we're all in different time zones, so also for the people who logged in at night, we very much so appreciate it. And we hope to be hearing from all of you soon. As mentioned, Rod and I are both on the integrations team. So in the case that you guys decide to move forward and start launching with the Broker API app, you will likely be in direct contact with us at some point. So we really look forward to that. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.